In this video, we're going to talk about my booty. Hang on. The booty that I brought back from AdeptiCon 2022. So I lived through AdeptiCon 2022. That should be a t-shirt, honestly. I came away with no COVID, which is good, but I did come back with some unfortunate con crud, which was a cold and a lot of other things going on and stuff, but it wasn't COVID. I got tested. I haven't had a cold in a long time. I have not had a cold in 2.5 years, easy. And so it was weird and everything. But beyond coming home with that, which I did not want, I also came home with a whole bunch of stuff because it had been a long time since I was at a convention, specifically Adepticon, and so I went a little hog wild. One of the very first things that I bought at Adepticon were these stencils from Anarchy models. These are HD stencil system model, the modeled number 1 and bigger modeled number 7, according to this. And what these are is these are airbrush stencils. You put these over a part of a model. Let's say this is the butt of a Glotkin, and you're like, well, he's got to have spots on his butt. I mean, just is the way they work. And so you put this over there and you spray a little bit of some color that's maybe just slightly darker than his butt, or maybe slightly lighter. It depends on how you want to do your particular Glotkin, butt or whatever. But these little stencils make these kind of organic animal type spots, which you see on frogs, you see on, what's that type of horse with the spotted butt? The Appaloosas, I think. There's all kinds of different animals that have spots on them. Some of them look like leopards, some of them whatever. And they actually had stencils there that looked more like leopards or jaguars and things like that. They have all kinds of things at that particular booth, but I've been looking for something like this for a while, and this was literally one of the first things I snatched up. For me this year, it was definitely a year of terrain. I bought a lot of terrain while I was at Adepticon. I stopped by the Lasercraft booth. I bought stuff from Lasercraft before. Generally, they do a lot of MDF, laser cut MDF, hence the laser part. But they've gotten into recently doing 3D printed stuff. So they're licensing stuff. In this situation, it's from Printable Scenery, and it's a group of canyon rocks. And they had them out there outside the box, and I was looking at them, and initially I thought they were poured resin, not porn resin. That's a totally different thing altogether. Poured resin. And then I picked it up and realized how light it was, and then I knew that that was not the case. And yeah, it turns out when you look real close at them, they are like FDM, 3D printed. The box is also sealed. Hang on, I got a knife. They're real nice. I can't wait for the weather to get less crappy outside so I can hit them with a good filler primer is what I need to do, and then start working on doing some quick paint jobs on them. Let's not cut any fingers off. There we go. Or not. There we go. Ooh, circus peanuts. Not actual circus peanuts. But, yeah, so it's filled with stuff like this. Let's see if you can see this here. I don't know what they use. I don't know what kind of machine. For some reason, the word Prusa comes into my head. I don't know if one of them told me that, or if that was just a friend of mine is like, I wonder if they did this on a Prusa. But it's a very, very good quality stuff. And a lot of times, 3D printed stuff, FDM, can look a little rough. And when it's on an organic shape like this, it kind of works out. It's not too bad. You can kind of hide that. But this stuff is really good quality. I'm going to have to use very little filler primer at all on this stuff, and then I'll get to painting. Looking forward to that. I'm going to have to repackage that. And then, also from Printable Scenery licensed, printed by Lasercraft Workshop, is also some grotto pools. And these are kind of the same thing. Again, 3D printed. And I can use these potentially for Rain in Hell. I can use these for all kinds of different games, but they are really nice, kind of the same style as the other ones as far as just sculpt style, I feel. And yeah, these will be a ton of fun. What I'll also do is I'll definitely, unless I go with like straight up lava, if I go with something else that's supposed to be maybe like a toxic pool or whatever, I'm going to definitely put some clear coat, like gloss at the last step over the top of this to make everything look nice and wet. But, very flat, again, almost nothing in the way of those kind of 3D printy striations and everything. And so I was really happy to be able to get both of these things. Speaking of more terrain, I also picked up a couple of terrain crates from over at Mantic. One is called Starship Scenery, and I'm working on a piece of terrain. I'm not saying I'm scratch building it. I'm just taking a bunch of currently produced things and putting them together. It's like kit bashing, but for terrain. I took actually a Mantic vehicle, like a flyer kind of thing that they've got for their Warpath game, and I'm going to make it look like it's been knocked over onto its side on the ground and people are working on it. But they kind of stopped working on it quite some time ago. Think of the Millennium Falcon in the new Star Wars movies when they kind of found it just sort of sitting there and took off. This sort of thing, except it's going to be tilted to one side. And so there's a lot of little pieces in here and barrels and crates and all kinds of things like that. That will be great. And they're all obviously just gambling around inside there. Not on sprues, that's for sure. But yeah, I'll be able to use some of these pieces. Oh yeah, they just come in here just in a bunch of stuff. But there's just a whole bunch of pieces. Sci-fi desks, sci-fi picnic table. Sure, why not? All these different kinds of things will be something that I can use for not just that terrain piece that I'm working on, but for other terrain pieces as well coming up. And then going in a completely different direction here, we have an abandoned town, which is a much larger setup. Those I feel like they're in plastic bags on the inside. But if you look here on the back, there's a bunch of gray plastic walls and ruined walls and things like that. And there's a bunch of brown fences and wagon wheel and crates and barrels. Again, you know, you got to have crates and barrels. And all those things are designed for your more fantasy style games, most likely. You could use them for historical, I don't know, ancients, maybe not even ancients, Visigoths, I don't know, Vikings, that kind of stuff. But again, these, if I can get that box open, those are all in plastic bags, so that's less stuff just rolling around inside the packaging. Was I talking about terrain? Oh, yeah, there's a lot more of it, as it turns out. I went to a bunch of different small booths here and there at AdeptiCon, which is one of the great things about going to any kind of miniature convention, specifically something that's basically the biggest one in the country, and just being able to go through and see all kinds of weird stuff that you might not be able to find otherwise. Now, a lot of this stuff is obviously available online, but it's harder to stumble across online sometimes. Obviously, you can buy things from Spellcrow online or Bad Squiddo games, things like that. You can buy all that kind of stuff, and you should if you get the chance, if you don't get to go to conventions. But if you're at a convention and you see this stuff, it's just a great place to sort of stumble across it and then start finding things out. A lot of this stuff is accoutrement, if you will. I like to sound French sometimes, for things that I'm going to be using to build terrain going forward in the future. This Standing Stone Menhirs is what it's called, from Spellcrow. This could be just a piece of terrain by itself, but it could also take a piece of terrain that I've already started working on. I add this to the base of that terrain over on the side or something like that, and it just makes the piece of terrain look cooler and more interesting, right? So we've got that. What else we got from Spellcrow? These are not, this is I don't even know who made these. Someone in Europe, and I found these at a store. I want to say it was Games Plus is the store. They're from Northern Illinois, and they always have a booth at AdeptiCon, and they're just cool, like kind of almost like World War I, kind of like, maybe you could use these for trenches, for, you know, I'm going to be working on some terrain soon for the Last War. I'm looking forward to that. Could be done for fantasy as well, but those are made out of resin. Here's something else from Spellcrow. Just again, like some kind of buildings that are just designed, like you can put these together to look like old ruins, and it's just a little flat little ruined house piece. Let's see here. Again, more of these types of things. This has got like a stucco sort of ruined inn is what it's called. Again, also from Spellcrow. This was very cool. These were like chimneys. If you're ever trying to build like a fantasy house and you want not just a normal squat little chimney, but one of those long sort of winding weird chimneys on the top of like a wizard's tower or something like that, there you go. These guys are ready to go. Like you just add these to whatever the roofing material is or whatever. You maybe shave the bottom off a little bit on them to get them to fit, and then boom, you got yourself really cool, interesting looking, you know, chimneys. I kind of hope to find more of these eventually, but we'll see. I think that's all the Spellcrow stuff. Like I mentioned, Bad Squiddo games. I've never gotten a chance to buy, you know, from Annie, specifically from Bad Squiddo, directly at a convention, but there was a company at AdeptiCon called Badger Games that was selling a lot of not just her stuff, but all kinds of different companies' stuff. So it's always nice to find retailers that carry stuff from like overseas and things like that when you go to conventions. Got some cool sacrificial stones. Here's a skeleton that's been chained to, you can see that, I don't know, skeleton that's been chained to a piece of rock, and there's other skeletons and chains and all kinds of things like that. Again, this will get added to some other piece of terrain that I'm working on so that I can, you know, use them to make it just look more interesting. You can build a cool ruined building in terrain. You can build what, but it's the extra little add-ons, the accoutrement, if you will. A little bit landslide over there. That's what makes those things interesting. We've got a bunch of piles of skulls and bones piles. Again, rather than you having to take your Citadel box of skulls or whatever company you use for their box of skulls and make a pile of skulls, boom, you just glue one of these down and you're on to the next part of your terrain. It's awesome. Wooden fences, also from Bad Squiddo. These are also just going to be very simple. I could build these, certainly, and there's times when I want to for specific reasons, but sometimes I'm like, I need a wooden fence here that looks all kind of worn down, glue it down onto the next bit. Palisades, which are basically just big logs that have been sharpened so that horses can't run roughshod through your encampment or whatever, I guess. And there's a bunch of shields kind of around the edges of them and stuff like that. So yeah, again, more from Bad Squiddo. These were super cool as well. And then lastly from them over there, Ancient Battlefield. So this is just a bunch of like old dead skeleton, like skeletonized archers and guys with shields. And it's just a bunch of really old, there's a guy impaled on a, you can barely see it, but there's a guy impaled there on a, maybe a palisade, who's to say. So all of this kind of stuff, you can see some of the images painted here on the back. All this kind of stuff is really cool to just be able to make your terrain go to the next level, and you don't have to necessarily sit there and try to sculpt or, you know, find a model for of a regular skeleton and then cut it all up and then glue it in all the right places. You certainly can, but sometimes this kind of thing makes things a lot quicker as well. Last of the terrain is I bought a bunch of stuff from Tabletop Scenics, aka I think TTCombat is the name of the company. Here is a bunch of old barrels and tires and other things that you might find in a back alley. This is Back Alley Accessories 2, as a matter of fact. But again, this is less for fantasy type stuff like that is, and more for the urban type stuff. There's a surprising number of teddy bears in here, which I think is kind of weird. There's at least 4. So that's an odd thing to find in a back alley, isn't it? I don't know, maybe not. This is all headstones all the time. Most of them say RIP on them. Or, you know, rust in pepperoni. And yeah, so that's really cool. And then we've got our normal kinds of sci-fi, like, you know, crates and, again, barrels. Things that you would have. This is cargo accessories is what this one's called. But these are the types of things that you would, again, that piece that I'm going to build with the ship tilted sideways, a couple of these things are probably going to show up in there as well, but these will show up in all kinds of different things. You can also just paint these separately if you wanted to, and then use them as scatter terrain in whatever kind of sci-fi style game that you're going for, and then it just gives you an extra little thing for your folks to be able to hide behind during a gun battle. And then a last thing here, this is just all vents, like vent casings, and I don't even know what this doesn't say on the back anymore what it is, but it's basically just all kinds of broken vents, fans, all kinds of things that if you're building anything from modern to sci-fi type, terrain, you want to be able to glue a little vent on there and then go on to the next part, as opposed to being like, well, now I got to figure out how to make a vent, or else you end up making terrain that doesn't have any vents, and then it looks weird because it's just these 2 walls and a floor, and you're like, it's a ruined building, but it must have blown off the junction boxes and the HVAC and everything off the building when it exploded. That's amazing. This stuff should be on your pieces of terrain. It makes it look more real. Astoundingly, not everything that I brought back from AdeptiCon 2022 was terrain. Some of it was models or bits for models, that kind of stuff. I stopped by the Trenchworks booth, and they are an American distributor for Victoria miniatures. And I picked up some Hexenheim Stormtroopers, a 10-man squad. Contains 10 28mm historic scale modular resin troops and bases plus officer upgrade components. And they're very cool. They could be post-apocalyptic, sort of. They could be maybe even technically just really weird looking Imperial Guard if you're of that particular bent. I will probably end up using these guys to some degree, maybe for, again, Last War or potentially Space Weirdos or all kinds of different games. I can swap out the heads, I can swap out different parts. Again, they're very modular. Here you can see just legs, but this entire baggie is filled with torsos and legs and heads and guns and little packs of ammo and all kinds of junk like that. And these are really nice resin models that I've had good luck with in the past from over at Victoria. And generally when you buy one of these sets, which cost I think maybe about it was between $50 and $60, I forget, they usually, especially conventions, throw in a single character as well. So I picked up Colonel Ash Ironside, who has a robot arm and a shotgun, and that's just a single model there. So yeah, this stuff is very cool, and I'm always looking for models like this that I can be like, I know I can use these parts for different things, or I can use them for different games and stuff like that. So I did that. What else? I also found, and Secret Weapon unfortunately I don't think they're in business anymore, but some stores obviously are still carrying their stuff, and I just found a bunch of conversion bits, just a bunch of gas mask heads with pan helmets. Again, World War I type stuff that I'm kind of interested in doing for the weird World War I stuff, which is wicked hard to say. Now you might say, hey, I thought that there was this big company, multi-billion-dollar company, Games Smart Shop, something like that. And it's true, there is. This is, I think, literally the only thing that I bought of Games Workshop from the entire weekend. And it's not because I'm against them or anything. It's just that it's like there's so much other stuff out there to pick up, and I can find generally Games Workshop stuff like literally across the street or down the street or, you know, those kinds of places. But this is a Cairn Wraith. This Cairn Wraith has been around for a while. They've been making this model since the early 2000s. And I almost always pick one up when I find them because they still sell them for around $15 instead of, say, $35, which most of their characters these days seem to be done. So there was a shop there that was selling a bunch of stuff, and I happened to come across the Cairn Wraith, and I'm like, well, I probably only have 3 or 4 of these still in the box at home. I might as well have a 4th or a 5th. I'm always going to convert them and do cool stuff with them. But honestly, this guy, the big Nurgle, fat guy with the axe, with the guts hanging out over the axe and all that stuff, I always pick that guy up. I've used 3 of them so far that I can think of in the modeling that I've done. But, it's always a good idea to pick up another one, as long as they're still, marked down cheap. And $15, I'm going to buy this. That makes a lot of sense because I'm going to turn him into something at some point. Why not? If you haven't recognized this guy, one of my earliest big videos that I ever did, as far as number of viewers and stuff like that, was the real use for liquid green stuff. And this particular model was the star. You could check that out here. Pachow, and learn the real use for liquid green stuff. Now, all the rest of the stuff I'm going to show you here was all purchased from Blacksite Studios. Blacksite Studios is a company that started out making laser cut MDF, and their kind of interesting thing that made them different than many other companies in the laser cut MDF field was that they would pre-color the pieces of laser cut MDF so that if you put the thing together, they already looked kind of pre-painted, sort of. And I've purchased things from them before, low concrete walls and things like that, and they're great and they work out nice. But they've started getting into not only model design, but they've also started getting into game design. They've produced games like Don't Look Back, which is a kind of a horror style kind of game. Think of like 80s slasher films and such. Lunar, and which is basically gunfights on the moon, in spacesuits and the whole deal. Big round head. And then Violent Dark, which seems to be kind of a mix between like maybe Space Hulk and Aliens, that kind of thing. And it's very cool. But these models, some of these might be for some of their games. I bought all of these models because I thought they were cool and I have ideas to use them in other things. Corporate Kill Team, it just says the anomaly. I don't know what that refers to. I know what Corporate Kill Team means, Lord knows. And they come in these kind of crazy, foil Ziploc things for, I don't know why. Probably they're inexpensive. But they're just resin models. Ooh, there's a card in there for, it's packed by Jonathan. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. But there's not a lot going on in here. There's just like a little Ziploc sticky thing, which we'll peel open, and we'll take a look at just these models. I'm not going to go through and open all of these. But, these are spin-casted resin, and this one's got, admittedly, a lot of flash, but that's, something that you get sometimes with resin. And the pieces, like the arms, are separate. And then I can use these models, and they come with bases, and the whole deal. I can use these for any kinds of different games. Again, Space Weirdos, Stargrave, all kinds of different things. Planet 28. And so I wanted to basically be able to have a collection of different resin miniatures to be able to go through that were very interesting. These PSC combat drones are these cool kind of robot combat drones, for lack of a better term. I can see using these in a lot of different types of games. Anything from like literally like Zona Alpha, which is supposed to be taking place roughly now, maybe near future, but all the way up into like kind of far future style games. Again, here's that Avalon City watch. Those guys are just weird looking. Someone said on my Twitch stream recently that these were based off of some sort of manga or anime or something like that that I hadn't heard of, but that may be the case. I just bought them because I thought they were pretty cool looking. There's also this Longhorn Mark III loader, which is just a big kind of robot sort of mech type of thing, and he doesn't have any guns. He's more pinchy, like, hey, I'm picking up, you know, cargo and moving it around. And I might try to magnetize him and maybe give him guns, but still have him have the ability to be pinchy if needs be, for depending on the game. But these were all things that don't really necessarily fit. I mean, they may fit some of their games, but I don't know. These next two packs are from the game Sludge, which is being produced by Metal King Studio, the makers of Relic Blade, and then also Blacksite Studio. And these are designed by Sean Sutter, who basically designed Sludge and also designed, like I said, Relic Blade and all that. And these are just a bag of heads. These are Royalist Battalion heads and Imperial Battalion heads. And Sludge is a game that he's designed. I'm not necessarily seeing myself playing Sludge, but the heads were so cool, and I know I've got a lot of uses for them that I'm like, well, I'm gonna pick up a couple of those because now I have this big shoebox full of heads. Let me back that up. They're little tiny plastic heads. It's a shoebox full of heads for kit bashing and stuff like that. And I just want to keep adding things to it as much as possible, which is another great reason to go to these types of conventions and pick up these types of things. So again, I was very happy to be back at AdeptiCon. It was 2 years of nothing. And I was, as a person who's been a fan since, I think, and going since 2010, 2009, something like that, that 2 years was really hard. I mean, there have been obviously plenty of other hardships at the time, but within my gaming life, it was hard not being able to go to my favorite convention. And so being able to pick up not necessarily any new games. I didn't pick up or even frankly play any new games while I was at AdeptiCon this year. Instead, what I did was just look at a lot of things, talk to a lot of people, film some stuff. I did a video where I talked to a bunch of fancy painter folks, and you can check that out. Pachow, and find all kinds of answers from those folks who were all asked the same question. It's the type of place you go to that if you've never been, it's hard to explain. I got to be honest with you, and that sounds like a cop-out, but it is an amazing place to just be surrounded by people who are, for the most part, very much like you, very, very much into the same hobby, having a lot of the same interests and ideas, and then being able to walk around, specifically in the exhibitor hall, and pick up amazing stuff that you didn't even know that you wanted, but now you've got multiple bags of it with you to take back home and start building and painting with.